The Minnesota House Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform for the 92nd State Legislative Session will come to order. The clerk will take the roll.
Chair Mariani.
Present.
Vice Chair Frazier.
Present.
Representative Johnson.
Present.
Representative Edelson.
Present.
Representative Feist. Representative Grossel.
Present.
Representative Hollins.
Present.
Representative Hewitt.
Present.
Representative Klevorn.
Klevorn, present.
Representative Long.
Present.
Representative Lucero.
Happy to be here.
Representative Mueller.
Mueller, present.
Representative Novotny.
Body present.
Representative O'Neill.
Representative O'Neill is excused. Abdul.
Representative Pinto.
Present.
Representative Poston.
Present.
Representative Raleigh.
Ollie present.
Representative Vang.
Present.
Representative Shung.
Present.
And that concludes roll call.
Very well. There is a quorum. Members, this hearing is being conducted under Minnesota House Rule 10.01, allowing for hearings to be held via use of distance voting, remote electronic voting, or voting by other means to protect the health and safety of the public, staff, and members. The hearing is live streamed on our House website and can be accessed by anyone visiting the committee page on the Minnesota House website. Those wishing to offer public testimony can contact via email the committee administrator, Mr. Juvenile Lundy, 24 hours prior to a hearing. And that email address is also available on our committee page. Representative Vice Chair Frazier, would you be so kind as to move our minutes of February 25th?
So moved, Chair.
Very well. Motion is before us. Discussion. Representative Johnson, I think a voice vote should suffice.
That would be fine.
Very well. All in favor of the Frazier motion to adopt the minutes of February 25th, please say aye.
Aye.
All same sign. Motion prevails. The minutes of February 25th are hereby adopted. Members, today is Youth Public Safety Day. We're going to have a combination of bills as well as some presentations for us to add to our knowledge of what's going on, as well as about evidence-based practices effective for public safety in regards to youth and issues concerning youth. We'll be hearing from Representative Klevorn's bill regarding the YIPA program. We'll also hear a bill from Representative Feist in regards to juvenile interrogation issues. We also then have a school safety presentation arranged by Representative Poston. And then we'll also have very quickly a bill that we heard last year that I want to refer out to the General Register regarding human rights and public safety. So with that, members, we're going to start with Representative Klevorn. Representative Klevorn moves. Representative Klevorn, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the proper motion is for the chair to bring House File 2701 up for possible consideration in our omnibus bill. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Very well. That'll be the motion then before us, which then brings the bill before us, and Representative Klevorn to your bill, House File 2701.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. House File 2701 is a $3 million one-time general fund request for supplemental funding to the Commissioner of Public Safety for Youth Intervention Grants administered by the Office of Justice Programs. Currently, there are 73 youth-serving organizations funded. The programs are basically split half Metro, half Greater Minnesota. More girls than boys are helped, and roughly 45% are youth of color or Indigenous youth. This bill has bipartisan support. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to keep my comments very short, and I'll just ask you to move on to our testifiers today. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Representative Klevorn. And We do have, you correct me if I'm wrong, I
Yes.
count 2, maybe 3 testifiers, beginning with Kendrick Walton.
That's correct. Thank you.
Very well. Let me ask Kendrick Walton to come forward, state his name for the record. I assume him. I don't always assume with names I don't really. That's a wonderful name, Kendrick, I have to say. State your name for the record and give us your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kendrick Walton, and I work as a restorative justice specialist at Community Mediation and Restorative Services, Inc. And
Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'd say now more than ever, we need to prioritize the needs of our children and our communities. I have firsthand experience working with students in the classroom following the murder of George Floyd in the beginning stages of the pandemic. I served as an educator in Minneapolis Public Schools through distance learning. And since then, I've seen the need for restorative justice practices grow substantially. As I see it, we have an obligation to invest in practices that are less punitive and look to build on community. We seek accountability that changes behavior in a positive direction. One-time funding for YIP grantees means that folks like myself and folks that look like me can go into schools and communities and engage with folks authentically. This means providing necessary spaces for youth to come together in solidarity and fellowship, along with addressing and repairing past harms and trauma. Tangibly, this looks like including and utilizing more technology in classrooms, launching programs and organizing events for folks to come together as we begin to move to a life beyond the pandemic. We have an opportunity to amplify student voices to determine what their needs are directly. I work with students every single day across the Northwest Metro and hear how so many feel burnt out, how so many feel unheard, how so many feel as though the adults in their life don't prioritize their needs. And now we have an opportunity to advocate for these folks. As I told a group of 7th graders last week, never underestimate the power of your voice in the community around you. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to highlight the joy and resiliency that these kids have. Through obstacles pertaining to race and socioeconomic status, transportation issues, the pandemic, and just the everyday struggle of being a preteen or a teenager, they find a way to show up. I see the fight and the optimism that so many of these kids bring to the table, and now we have an opportunity to show up for them in a similar manner. I bring this up because restorative practices are rooted in love and obligation. We are in a unique position to pivot towards expanding on the restorative work we already do. This means more restorative circles geared towards repairing harm, more circles that bring us together to talk about the issues that are important to us. The work we can do can be a proactive tool to better public safety. CMRS also works with court-referred juvenile diversions, and I've seen the transformations that happen when we opt to use restorative practices firsthand. With this method, we can work to repair harm while also holding folks accountable for the harms that they've committed. Many of you have children of your own or no children growing up in these unprecedented times. Providing funding for the YIP grant will be a step to show these folks that they are worthy and affirm what everyone already knows, that when we stand united in community, we can change the things that are pervading our homes and communities. I encourage you all to stand with us with putting restorative practices and the YIP grant at the forefront of repairing harm, holding folks accountable, and building community. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. Hopefully you can stick around for any questions and answer following the other testifiers. I have to say, a powerful message about building community is the basis for public safety, but with a strong accountability for changing behavior and repairing harm. Wonderful work. Thank you for the work that you do. Next, we have Emily Fulton Foley. Emily, if you can come forward, state your name for the record and give us your testimony, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members. My name is Emily Fulton Foley. I'm the director of the Northfield Union of Youth, which is a youth-led organization in Southeast Minnesota based out of a drop-in center named The Key, open 8 hours a day, every single day of the year. I'm here today to ask that you move forward with additional funding for the Youth Intervention Programs Grant. The importance of funding youth intervention cannot be overstated, though it's not my desire to burden you with facts and figures today that you already know. A youth that I worked with once told me that he was a good seed, but he was planted in such poor soil that he often felt like he never even had a chance for growth. And he said this to me as I had picked him up from a host home sober for 5 months, and drove him to look for apartments in Minneapolis, where he had just enrolled in a technical college on a full ride scholarship. And never has something that a youth said resonated with me so much. It might be that he was experiencing self-pride for one of the first times in his life right in front of me, or the fact that he was achieving so much after significant trauma and challenges. Or it might simply have been that I was raised on a produce farm, and so it was an apt metaphor for me. But the reason doesn't really matter. I knew that his months of work and his success needed to be shared with everyone who contributed to creating that better soil. Everyone who made sure that his struggles didn't define him, and that he was given choices for a healthier, safer life. We have seen increases in depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, avoidance behaviors, and mounting pandemic fatigue leading to riskier behaviors among many of our youth. It's terrifying and overwhelming to imagine what the long-term effects of this time period will be, but it's also very catalyzing. It helps us know what we're working for and what we're working towards. And we work directly with the youth to build relationships as caring adults, to identify their circles of support, to mediate before and through crises, and help them find safety. And the reason we're so able to connect with at-risk young people is because of continued financial support from the YIP grant to keep our programs low barrier and free for all. Opportunities for quality trainings through YIPA for the team, youth, and caregivers, as well as dedicated staff members who understand that caring for our community youth creates a safer, more inclusive space for us all to live in. A year of supplementary funding would give our organization room to explore ways to effectively reach youth in a digital world, develop youth-led programs with greater capacity, and provide additional resources ensuring that those basic needs are met. I would ask that you all take a moment today to think about a mentor that was impactful to you in your youth. Remember the ways that that adult made you feel valued, challenged you to succeed, or helped you to grow. And then imagine that that was the only adult in your life that you believe actually cared for you. How might your life have been different if they weren't there? How might you be different if they weren't there? Holistic, sustained collaboration between regional and state entities allows for youth stability and personal success. I implore you to support this additional funding for the YIP grant. Help us sustain the growth that we all so meaningfully struggle for in this moment, and help us give more kids a chance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Fulton Foley, and thank you for your work as well. I know your community a little bit. I used to drive out there quite a bit when I was a college student up here in the Twin Cities to visit two wonderful campuses there in Northfield. One of the things that we often hear is that the kind of issues you identified are not issues of small town Minnesota. They might be of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, maybe even Mankato, but certainly not on Northfield. How unusual is that? Or is that, in your experience, do you think that the kind of challenges and opportunities that the key is dealing with, working with, are issues that are prevalent throughout our state?
Yeah, throughout every single community, throughout our state, throughout the nation. The U.S. Attorney General just issued his warning about youth mental health and an advisory, I think showing kind of the ubiquity of the struggles that young people are facing right now. And maybe some of those struggles look different depending on if you're in a rural community or an urban community. But there is a level across all of that young people struggle with. And we are certainly seeing things on the rise here that I know personally echo with northern Minnesota communities, that echo with places in the Twin Cities, in the heart of the Twin Cities. And in my, I'm a little biased on this, but in my opinion, there are things that are happening in our rural communities where we need additional support, that because it's so far, to keep kids engaged in their circles of support, to keep them involved in school, to keep giving them access to adults that they know and young people who have surrounded them. And we don't have access to those resources as often in rural communities as we might see in more metro communities.
So glad you're doing the work that you do, Ms. Fulton Foley, and hopefully you can stick around for any other questions and or comments. Very well. Representative Klevorn, I show that there's a pre-recorded video by
That's
Kelsey.
correct. It's a student who's in class at this moment, so that she's testifying by video. If we could identify Mr. Paul, I think you're going to share your screen. Is that correct?
Yes, I can certainly do that.
Thank you very much.
How are you, sir? Good to see you. Glad you shared your screen with us.
Nice to see you too, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to show this video that we pre-recorded because it's so important for young people right now to be in school. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and we will.
Give us your name for the record real quick too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Paul Munier. I am the Executive Director of YIPA, the Youth Intervention Programs Association.
Welcome.
And I believe you can see my screen now. Is that correct?
I do see it.
Great. The name of this young person is Chelsea Johnson. She is the president of the youth board for Emily's program, the Northfield Union of Youth, and the key kind of hangout center that they have.
My name is Chelsea Johnson. I started going to the Key when I was 11 years old, even though they don't allow people under the age of 12 inside the Key. The Key is a safe place that is free and available from the time of 3 to 10 p.m. every single day. And one day when I was downtown with my friends and it was pouring rain and we didn't have anywhere else to go after a local restaurant kicked us out for loitering. Right away, I started being friends with other kids that were at the Key and I kept coming back to hang out with them. I also created a very good relationship with some of the staff, and that was important because I didn't have a lot of adults to look up to and help guide me through life. When I first started coming to the Key, I didn't care about anything besides being a hooligan, but having a place to be was super important to me growing up. For 8 years of my life, the Key has provided a safe place where I am not judged for the things that I do, and I can go there for help for anything really. Without the Key and the adults that supported me, I believe that my life would end up very differently. I wouldn't have graduated high school because I dropped out of public high school, and staff at the Key helped me to apply to our area learning center where the style of education just works better for me. I wouldn't have a job I liked because staff took time to understand what I wanted for a career and helped connect me to a hiring manager. I wouldn't have gotten my driver's license without staff encouraging me or practice driving with me. I wouldn't have gotten my own apartment without staff helping with application and understanding the process. And I definitely wouldn't be able to express myself the way I want to. Everyone at the youth center was different, but we were all allowed to be who we are, and it helped me to learn that I could be myself and be accepted when I didn't feel that way any other place. I feel like I am outgrowing the Key at this point in life, and that is both sad and happy. I'm the current youth board president, and this leadership experience is something I don't think I'll ever have the chance to do ever again. I'm so glad that a new era of kids get to experience what I experienced. I'm thankful for the adults who support the Key and youth leadership because it has impacted a lot of youth lives. Because youth leadership forces people to listen to young people, there aren't assumptions that are being made about what youth are thinking or need. More than just keeping kids afloat, places like the Key help kids to achieve the goals they want to achieve and live the life that they deserve. When I didn't have great relationships with my parents growing up, it was important that I had adults that weren't biased and wanted to help me for me and not their own personal benefit. I am grateful to live in a community that has a Key Youth Center because I can't imagine what a community without one would be like. Every kid deserves to have a safe place and adults that are there for them, no matter what. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you, Mr. Munier, for bringing Chelsea to us. Powerful that she was able to have some access to some good, strong guidance and opening up opportunities for her. Representative Klevorn, we're open now for a few minutes for questions and or comments. I do see Representative Poston's hand up and then Representative Mueller. So let me go in that order. Representative Poston.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. My questions are for the bill author, Representative Klevorn. But first, I'd just like to make a statement. You know, I'm a greater Minnesota legislator, and I hear a lot of really positive things about the programs that YIPA supports up in my neck of the woods. I get that feedback from law enforcement and from the schools, et cetera. So I just wanted to make that comment quick. I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask them all at once because they all kind of tie together. I'd kind of like you to tell us more about what this one-time appropriation goes for. I'd like to know if there's any matching that happens with this appropriation. And I'd like to know how much of the appropriation is retained by YIPA. So if you could help me with those, Representative Klevorn, I'd appreciate it.
Representative Klevorn, and you also have the director here, I suspect, who might be able to help with that as well. Representative Klevorn.
I do. I will go to Paul in just a minute, but since he's specifically asked about the appropriation, YIPA has I understand it's a 5% administrative piece that they keep for themselves. And I understand that most of the programs are a dollar for dollar match, but I do think it's better if we would go to Mr. Mueller about these questions. Thank you.
Very well, Mr. Mueller. And you might be.
You're muted, Paul.
Thank you. I sounded so formal. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Poston, for your wonderful questions. I'll try to answer them very concisely and briefly. The one-time funding that would go to these programs, we think it's best because these are established programs that have been around and they can figure out how to use them in the best possible way. In talking with some of our members, and we haven't fully polled them, but we hear anecdotally all the time that they're still trying to recover and connect with young people like Emily was talking about. There's young people that have fallen by the wayside and they've become disconnected with, and this will help them with outreach and get connected. Some of the uses would be for technology reasons. Young people still don't have access to the internet or phones or iPads to do some kind of e-therapy and e-connections with youth workers, which is still absolutely going on today. Not everybody's back to normal by far. So this would be essentially breathing room for proven, effective programs to get them back on their feet and get, just like small businesses, man, we're all trying to kind of recover from what we just went through the last 2 years, and youth programs and youth serving programs are no different. This one-time boost is not going to change their world forever, but it will help them get recalibrated and getting back to what they do best, and that's building relationships with young people. Yes, there is a one-to-one match, and we love that idea. We think these programs need to be viable in their communities first. And what we're asking the state to do with the YIP grant is support local communities, help them solve their problems, because these members know better than I do, or I think a lot of other people do, what the needs of their communities are the best. Kendrick knows his kids best. Emily knows her kids best. Let's help them solve those community problems. And then the third question about, yes, we get 5%. Representative Poston, what we do is we put that back into professional development. Most of the members here don't know. We trained 8,000 youth workers last year across the state of Minnesota. And I say this with as much humility as I can put forward, but our trainings are as good as anyone's. And I will put the quality of them up against anybody, anywhere who gets way more funding to do this stuff than we do. All our trainings accessible online. So whether you're in Ely or Edina, you have the ability to consume as much professional development as you like. So thank you for helping us support the professional development, because if these youth workers have an opportunity to work with young people, they have to know what to do. It's just like any other industry. You can't just like pretend you know. You really have to know how to most effectively build relationships and connect with young people. So thank you for your question, Mr. Chair.
Powerful methodology and practice, Paul. I mean, I run a nonprofit, and it's tough to find resources for professional development. But nonprofit, especially one that's working, in your case, with young people, you're only as good as the information, the centeredness, the training, and the passion of the people that you have, and that needs to be constantly fed. Representative Poston?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, may I just add one quick thing? We not only train youth workers, so many of our programs, like Emily's programs, parents take our trainings. We have young people taking our trainings. We open them up. They're free for everybody. That's what we do with the YIP grant, is we make it available for anybody who wants to get good at working with young people. That's what we do with the money. Thank you. Sorry.
I didn't know that. That's good to know. Representative Poston.
Thank you, Chair Mariani, and thank you, Paul, for answering those questions. I would ask you, Paul, if you can, to stay on the call today because there's going to be a RIPL presentation here in a little bit that I think you'd be very interested in seeing, because it's all about relationships with youth and building trust, etc. So if you can hang on, I'd love for you to see that.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I did see Representative Mueller, you put your hand down, but I just want to make sure I'm not bypassing you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Poston asked most of my questions. So.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for helping us be efficient, Representative Mueller. Representative Klevorn, we're about to lay this over. Last comments, thoughts, or anyone, one of your testifiers, anything you want to, leave us with?
Well, I just want to say thank you to the testifiers for coming today and for all the work that they do to help our youth. We often talk about the cost of programs, but we don't talk about sometimes the savings that those programs generate. And it's my understanding that the youth intervention programs, for every dollar that the state invests, they return another $9.78 in savings. So I think that savings is also really important as well. I would like to once again thank the members, the 9 members of this committee that have signed on to the bill for their bipartisan support. And I ask for your support as we lay this bill over for possible inclusion in our finance bill. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you for the reminder of those cost benefits. When things go wrong, it gets pretty expensive no matter what that is. And so this is an opportunity to get out in front and get things right. Mr. Walton, Ms. Fulton Foley, Mr. Munier, thank you for being with us here today. Representative Klevorn, the chair will lay over House File 2701 for possible inclusion in this committee's omnibus bill.
Thank you very much.
Members, next we have Representative Feist. Representative Feist has House File 2749. And Representative Feist, the chair, will bring this bill forward also for possible inclusion. So we won't be acting on this bill today for possible inclusion in the committee's omnibus bill. So actually, I didn't need to gavel that. And so the bill is before us. Representative Feist, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. So this bill was developed, sorry, I'm moving my boxes around so I can read. Okay. This bill was developed to better protect young people who are questioned by law enforcement or in a school setting. I have been working on clarifying language to ensure that the intention behind the bill in Section 2 is to address scenarios analogous to custodial interrogation in the school context. This is the bill's first hearing, and I consider it the start of an important conversation about how best to protect youth's constitutional rights. This bill was drafted with the following in mind. Researchers have found that youth waive their Miranda right to an attorney an astounding 90% of the time. Youth make false confessions at exponentially higher rates than adults. And until the age of 25, the juvenile prefrontal cortex is not well developed, which means they lack the ability to delay and reflect, to take all options into account, to contemplate risks and consequences, and they lack social intelligence, meaning that they are uniquely susceptible to pressure. This bill is broken down into 2 contexts, law enforcement and the school setting. In both scenarios, it limits the admissibility of statements in court where counsel is not consulted, and it requires parental notification when law enforcement questions youth. Notably, in each context, statements can still be taken for other purposes. They just cannot be used in a court of law against the youth. The Supreme Court has found that, quote, children cannot be viewed simply as miniature adults, unquote. We need to acknowledge the realities of youth cognitive development and the deep inequities embedded in our criminal legal systems. The United States Constitution has built into it protections for defendants that our founders thought were fundamental to the values we hold as a nation. The Constitution gives all citizens a right to counsel. The Constitution gives all citizens the right against self-incrimination. The Constitution gives all citizens the right to privacy. All of these rights weave together to create a free and fair society and a system of laws that protect individual liberties against government overreach. This bill is simply intended to transform these constitutional rights that apply to youth in theory into actual rights for Minnesota's young people. Thank you. I'll turn it over to my testifiers now.
Very well, thank you, Representative Feist. And we do have, I see a couple of folks, and so I'm going to ask My good friend Sarah Davis from the Legal Rights Center to come forward, identify yourself for the record and give us your testimony.
Thank you very much, Chair Mariani and members. My name is Sarah Davis, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you today about the critical policy changes encompassed in this important legislation. I'm a lawyer, and I've spent almost 15 years representing children in the criminal legal system. I'm also the executive director of the Legal Rights Center, a law firm founded as a tool of community self-empowerment over 50 years ago by the Black and American Indian communities coming together, and later welcoming immigrant communities to their coalition. House File 2749 is about protecting the rights of children, putting into place critical protections that many parents and guardians and others with children in their lives that they love and care about assume already exist. Most parents don't know that a police officer can go to their child's school and question their child with no notification to the parent and no lawyer. Most school administrators and teachers do not know that statements they take from a child in their school that are intended to help figure out what happened between students or ensure that they're providing needed supports and services can be included in or attached to a police report, and they don't want them used in that way. Both of the provisions in this bill are designed to protect children in inherently coercive situations. Coerced statements and wrongful confessions are a significant problem in our youth justice system. According to the American Bar Association, 90% of children waive their Miranda rights. And research has also demonstrated that children make false confessions at significantly higher rates than adults, with evidence showing that children ages 14 to 17 are particularly vulnerable to making false confessions. This is a very real problem here in Minnesota. The recordings of interrogations and the statements taken from children would shock most people. For today's purposes, I want to take just a few minutes to share with you a few examples from around the state. For example, a 17-year-old who was called down to the principal's office where he was met by a police investigator. He was told to go into an office to talk with the police investigator and when he asked whether he had to go, he was told yes. The police investigator then proceeded to question him. The youth tried to ask about having a lawyer. He asked the investigator, "Is this about court? Am I going to have to get a lawyer? Because I just don't want to say something if I don't have that right to have a lawyer." The investigator told the youth that they would talk about that later and continued to question him. This was a child who was an immigrant without legal status and for whom English was not his first language. And yet the investigator just continued to interrogate him. A judge later found that the child's efforts to ask for a lawyer were not sufficient, that he had not sufficiently exercised his rights. Another child, this time 16 years old, was questioned by a school resource officer about a crime he did not commit. The officer used his power with the school to summon the youth to the main office and question him. The child asked to be able to talk to his father and was told his father would be called, but the officer kept questioning him. The child said he did not want to talk without his father there. Miranda warnings were given, and the child said he did not want to talk. However, the officer did not let him leave the office and proceeded to spend 30 minutes telling him, "You're a good kid, how could you have gotten involved with this," etc. Eventually, when the child realized his dad wasn't coming and he was not leaving until he said something, the child started talking. But he just made things up to please the officer. He gave a completely nonsensical confession. Eventually, the officer asked the child whether he wanted to waive his rights and talk to him, and the child said yes. The child was ultimately acquitted after trial with evidence showing that the alleged crime never even happened. The only reason charges were ever pursued was because of this false confession. It's also worth noting that a very common situation that we see involves circumstances where school officials question a child about alleged conduct, and then that information is shared with law enforcement and used as the basis for charging. One colleague shared with me that she has had several circumstances where school officials put a child in a room, circle him up with the assistant principal and other school staff, and then take a statement which ends up being shared with the police. I also want to share with you about a 14-year-old child who was summoned by Child Protection to an interview at the police department. The child was not allowed to have his mom present, not read his Miranda rights. The child was extremely submissive to adults and gave an outrageous confession to a criminal sexual conduct against a sibling, which was preposterous. It was a completely false confession. It later came to light that the allegation was made by a sibling seeking attention. After 2 long years of litigation, the case was dismissed. But the damage was done. The child had been badgered by the police officer over a false allegation, which was later retracted. The confession given didn't even match the allegation. The child is Hmong, and the police officer used the child's cultural deference to his elders against him, guilt-tripping him and playing up the fact that he did not want to be called a liar. Finally, I want to tell you about a 12-year-old child who was called down to the office of his middle school to be interrogated by a police officer and a child protection worker. He was shown into a windowless room and left there with 2 adults he had never met before, one of whom told him she was a police officer. He was read his Miranda rights, and when asked if he understood, he said no. The officer simply reread the same rights and proceeded to question him about a criminal sexual conduct allegation. The child said he had not done it, and the officer immediately cut him off to say, "We know and I know that it happened." The officer then went on to say that people don't make up stories like this. The child tried to share what he had been doing during the time in question, but the officer cut him off again and said, "But that is not the truth, because the person who told us this happened would not lie about it." The officer then pointed out that she could tell the child seemed uncomfortable and nervous, but again said, "We know what happened." The child again said, "I didn't do it." And the officer again said, "We know you did it." The officer pressed the child with, "Why would this person lie about it?" The child said he didn't know. The officer then told the child to be truthful. And when he said he was being truthful, she immediately retorted, "No, you're not." At that point, the child began to cry. The officer continued to press the child, telling him he was not being honest. Through sobs, the child expressed fears of being taken away from his family, saying he knew that had happened to someone else. The officer offered to help him, and the child said, "I don't need help," and continued to say that he didn't do it, while the officer continued to say that she knew that he did. This went on and on until eventually the child told the officer what she wanted to hear. I could go on for hours or days even with these stories, and so could my colleagues who represent kids around the state, but I know our time is limited. This is a really significant problem, and the policies encompassed in this bill are critical. I would be remiss if I did not note that because we're talking about Minnesota's youth justice system, we need to be clear that we are talking about this happening over and over again to Black and brown children who continue to be brought into the criminal legal system at over 5 times the rate of their white peers, not because their behaviors are different, but because our systems target and criminalize them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And hopefully you can stick around too for some possible questions. Next we have Jen Westmoreland Bouchard. If you can come forward, I believe you're a school board member, so the Honorable Westmoreland Bouchard, please come forward, fellow elected, give us your name for the record and provide us with your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jen Westmoreland Bouchard, and I currently serve as chair of the Hopkins School Board. I am also an educator for going on 23 years now. And it's a pleasure to appear before you today to speak in support of House File 2749. As a school board member, I represent a diverse community in a state with some of the worst educational racial disparities in the nation. It's a moral imperative that I work in partnership with elected officials at all levels of government to break the school to prison pipeline that impacts our students of color and students accessing special services at disproportionate rates. I'm proud to work alongside colleagues in Hopkins Public Schools who are committed to creating an anti-racist and authentically inclusive system in which all students can thrive. Our Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition supports House File 2749 because it provides important legal protection for students both inside and outside of school. It ensures that their constitutional rights are upheld and helps to mitigate against the bias and racism that we know exist in public education, social services, and criminal justice systems. Currently, policies regarding peace officer questioning of youth while in school are determined at the school district level. A state law would provide continuity and clarity for school districts, social services organizations, and police departments when it comes to protecting the rights of youth. A young person's access to justice and the protection of their legal rights should not be determined by the zip code in which they live or attend school. This bill really isn't about limiting the tools of law enforcement or educators and administrators in our buildings. It's about what's doing right for students by protecting their legal rights. It's also about creating the conditions for trust in our schools. I'm reminded of a situation a former staff member in our district shared with me. A student was questioned by a peace officer about a conflict in one of our schools. The student's mother was upset that her child had been questioned without legal guidance about the child's rights during this interaction. This incident caused a breach of trust between this family, the school staff, and local law enforcement. Had this law been in place, both the school staff and the peace officer would have been clear about what needed to happen to protect the rights of that child. If our students and their families are confident their legal rights will be protected while they're in our schools, they will be able to develop deeper and more trusting relationships with adults. Seen as these relationships are one of the key components of social development and academic success, the importance of this bill really cannot be overstated. So for these reasons, I urge you to support this important piece of legislation. Thank you for all the work that this committee does to serve the interests of youth and communities across our state.
Thank you, School Board Member Westmoreland Bouchard. And with that, Representative Feist, we'll open this up for questions and comments. And I see a few hands up. We'll start with Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Feist, for bringing this bill. I do think it's vitally important. You know, some of the stories that Ms. Davis told kind of tugged at my heart that those kids would get involved in the system that way. Our school to prison pipeline is real, and it's very unfortunate that it can happen in a way where stories are fabricated, and those fabricated stories are used as evidence to put our young people into a system that causes lifelong consequences. And it also is the cost to society as well. Our taxpaying dollars pay for that when our system gets it wrong. And so my question to you is that if we have this bill in place, would it have prevented those kids from being wrapped up in the system the way they were? And also would it have prevented the cost that it would have been to our taxpayers and paying for that, for those resources to prosecute and hold those young people? And I don't know if the question's for you or for one of your testifiers, but appreciate the answer. And thanks again for bringing this bill.
We'll start with Representative Feist, and feel free to defer.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Frazier, for that question. I definitely think that our system would function more efficiently and effectively if this law were in place and everyone, including kids under the age of 18, had these constitutional protections. But I will throw it over to Sarah Davis, who can provide kind of more concrete examples of how this law would have impacted cases that she has directly handled. Thank you.
Very well, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Chair Mariani, Representative Frazier, Representative Feist, and members. To directly answer your question, Representative Frazier, yes, the provisions in this bill would have avoided a lot of costly and lengthy litigation. I think I told you in several of the stories that I shared that charges were eventually dismissed, kids were acquitted. And we're talking about years of litigation. I know you know that from your background about how long these cases can take. It's the court resources, it's the law enforcement resources, and I just also want to highlight the trauma to children. I'm not playing for you some of these recordings today, but if the way I read them tugged at your heart, and I'm by no means a voice performer here, you should to listen to children sobbing as they're being interrogated. If anybody has watched the Netflix series about the exonerated five, that I think that can give you a good picture of what this looks like. It is very real life, and it happens. It's happening every day. The stories I shared with you are not just my own. I mean, I could speak for hours about my own clients, but I reached out to colleagues across the state because I want to hear this is not just a Hennepin County issue. This is a statewide issue, and it shouldn't be a justice by geography issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Frazier, you good?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Very well. Representative Mueller.
I believe that Representative Hollins was ahead of me. I just wanted to make sure she raised her hand before me that she.
Oh, sure. We'll get around to her. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chair Mariani, and Representative Feist. I had a question. Being an educator for the last 20 years, I was wondering, Representative Feist, is this planning on going to education policy? I mean, this is going to be a very different, I have never been in a situation where if something happened with a student, that parents weren't called. And granted, I don't send a lot of kids to the office, but no matter what, even if I went to the principal's office with a problem, the first question they ask me is, have you called the parents? Is this, or have you contacted the parents? What have you done to mitigate this effort? And so I just wanted to know, is this something that we're going to have to take to education policy? And if so, I just wanted to know how it's going to get there, if it's going to get there, all those exciting questions.
Good question. Representative Mueller, we are going to lay this over, so we're not going to move it right now, but perhaps for Representative Feist, just, generally the value and wisdom of having a conversation in education policy.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Representative Mueller, I think that would definitely make sense. I agree that this does have significant implications for our schools. For right now, we're laying it over. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is kind of the beginning of this conversation, and I am working on some language just to clarify the intent. But your experience as an educator and always calling parents is remarkable. I know just in conversations with colleagues about this bill, I've heard stories about children being questioned and statements being used against them. I know constituents in my district have told me really troubling stories of kids being accused of things that they didn't do and being questioned without parents ever being notified. So I do know that this is a pervasive issue, and perhaps School Board Chair Westmoreland Bouchard could also speak to that more specifically as well.
School Board Member Westmoreland Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to just kind of flag another area of concern for school districts that have SROs, school resource officers. These officers are interacting with students throughout the day. There are also school districts that have other types of relationships and agreements with police departments that bring officers into the schools. And what I've seen in my experience as a school board member is a real need for clarity when it comes to those interactions, that there are a lot of assumptions made that aren't necessarily encoded in policy. And there are things that are encoded in policy that aren't always implemented in practice. And so I do think it's important to include educators in this conversation. And I do think it's very important to have some clear, bright lines in place that protect the rights of our students.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Representative Feist, you may want to have a conversation with Chair Richardson about this bill if you haven't yet, but that might be worthwhile at this point. Representative Mueller, I'm going to move to Representative Hollins unless you had a follow-up.
No, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Feist, for bringing this forward. I think this is a really important bill, and it's something that's personally important to me because I've seen this play out. My own brother experienced this when we were growing up, and granted, that was a while ago, but I know that this is a reality, right? I know that being questioned and not having parents or law enforcement, or I'm sorry, parents or a lawyer present is a reality for a lot of folks, and especially for kids of color. So I wanted to know, because we know that discipline disparities in schools are linked to juvenile justice disparities. And it really becomes the school to prison pipeline, right, that we've heard so much about. And, I'm a person of color, my kids are people of color. And I think we should all be concerned about this, because anytime there's a pipeline for something negative, it's scary. And it's something that we should work hard to stop. So I was wondering if you have any statistical information on juvenile justice racial disparities that either you or your testifiers could provide us with.
Representative Feist.
Yep, thank you. Yes, I have spoken with the Department of Education specifically about how being in juvenile detention impacts their education and how difficult it is to ensure that kids who are caught up in the criminal legal system are able to achieve their full academic and then professional potential. And actually, if Representative Mueller has anything to say, I've also had conversations with her about this, and I know that she has some expertise not to just take you by surprise, but I know that she has a lot of knowledge around this as well. And I just definitely think that that's something that we need to be keeping in mind, that it's an issue just for the future prosperity of our state, that every single kid in this state is able to achieve their full academic potential. And we know that when they get involved in the criminal legal system, that potential is significantly negatively impacted.
I heard you trying to entice Representative Mueller into the conversation. I would say, members, we're at that time where if we don't move over to Representative Poston's presentation, we probably are not going to get it in. And he's got a visitor here, and I would really like us to be able to do that. The list just got really big. So, Representative Johnson, let me just go to you right now. And then we'll see if we get to Representative Poston's presentation or not.
Chair Mariani, Representative Feist, I understand what you're trying to do. I have a feeling you've actually never talked with the school administration to see how they do things there, or with law enforcement, or with the court system. In the law enforcement world, when we're going to interrogate a child and question them about a serious offense, we usually have information on hand already. Is the reason why we're going to be talking to that particular child or juvenile or young adult, whichever way you want it turns out to be. But before we talk to them, we always contact the parent. It's in the court rules. If we're going to use a statement from them, we have to have parent consent to talk to them. And the parent decides if to get a lawyer or not. We ask the parent and read if it's an interrogation, Miranda warning with the child present with the parent or the custodian or the guardian, if that happens to be the case. Because without doing that, that statement is not usable in court. As far as the schools go, they have their own rules, which are different. So I don't know where some of these stories came from, because if any of that was true, that none of that information would be used in court, and the officer's credibility would be shot, and they would pretty much be out of a job. Now, looking over this bill, I know the chair plans to lay it over, but this also needs to go to judiciary. I've seen the fiscal note for this bill. For those who haven't, just this biennium, it's almost $1 million. Almost $3 million in the tail, and 14 FTEs on top of it, because it says a lawyer shall be present. That's 14 new employees for the public defenders. And then, is there some reading the bill? Is there exigent circumstances? Yes, but there's a lot more to this bill. This bill needs to needs to go to judiciary. There's major issues in how things are done in our education system. It needs to go to education policy. And there might be other things that because of some of the stuff going on, it might even have to go to education finance. We don't know yet, because we're still trying to figure everything out in the fiscal note. But just the public defender's fee is, fiscal part of it is substantial, especially with 14 new FTEs for this bill. I know the chair plans to lay it over. There's a lot of issues that need to be dealt with this bill, so right now I'll stop there, but suggest that somehow this bill get to both education policy and judiciary if the intent is to move this bill forward at any time. Thank you.
Noted, Representative Johnson, Representative Feist. I think there might have been an initial question there about an assumption about who you didn't talk to. It surely looks like you spoke with a school board member because you have one here. But certainly feel free to share with the members who you have been able to connect with, gather information about. your bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson. I did have a really excellent conversation with my police chiefs as well as Jeff Potts at the Chiefs Association. So I have reached out to them. I also have had extensive conversation with prosecutors about this bill and as well with with educators and school board members. So I agree with you that it's important to have these conversations and to make sure we understand the practical impact of our bill. Regarding the cost, I believe the cost is worth it so that all members of our society have the constitutional protections that our founding fathers saw fit to grant us. And so I think that's an investment that is worth it. I also think that it might have an upfront cost that will have really significant savings for society, for public safety, and for the state in the long run. And I think that we should be thinking as legislators about the big picture and making sure that we're thinking about what our values are that we invest in. And I just want to emphasize that parents are not required to be present when children are read their Miranda rights. And if they waive them, then those rights are waived. There is no requirement that a parent be present. And I think that it is very important that parents be notified. And so that is really what this bill stems from. 90%, as I said, and as Ms. Davis said, 90% of kids waive their rights. Basically, almost no children are protected by the Miranda warnings, and therefore they are not able to assert those constitutional protections. And so the goal here is to make sure that they can.
All right, very well. Representative Feist, thank you for bringing this bill. I think there's still some work that needs to happen about this. Our committee has been, in fact, been in touch with Judiciary Committee. They're not feeling the need to see this bill, but we'll certainly continue to have that conversation if and when this bill comes back up. But thank you for an important conversation today. I also want to thank your testifiers, Ms. Davis and School Board Member Westmoreland Bouchard. With that, members, the chair lays over House File 2749 for possible inclusion in our committee's omnibus bill. With that, Representative Poston, kept you waiting a bit. Why don't we have you come forward? So this is basically a presentation. I do want to make sure we allow a little bit of time so that we could do basically a procedural move at the end for a bill that we moved out last year. But I think this is an important conversation, and I appreciate your working to set this up for the committee's consideration today. So Representative Poston, I'll have you introduce your the topic and your testifier, and I believe there might be, I'm not sure there's a video or not involved, but I'll let you know what it. Yeah. Representative Poston.
Chair Mariani, thank you for this opportunity. Ben Rudrud is a constituent of mine, and Ben is the founder and the owner of RIPL Training. And we've always talked about school safety. And typically when we have that conversation, we talk about police officers, we talk about resource officers, we talk about school hardening. And in some cases that's necessary. But what Ben has come up with is a program that I hope will help us identify warning signs and stop some of these bad things that we've seen in schools before they happen. So his program really focuses on building relationships, building trust, and building awareness. And I think when you see this program, you'll understand that it really does, in fact, make a difference. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to Mr. Rudrud.
Very well, thank you, Representative Poston. Mr. Rudrud, welcome to our committee. Please state your name for the record and provide us with your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, wonderful committee members. My name is Justin Benjamin Rudrud. I'm known by my middle name of Ben. And thank you all for your wonderful time today. I feel honored to be in this meeting today because I've heard so many wonderful things about the one word that I focus a lot on, and that is relationships. My background is nearly 13 years working actively in law enforcement in different areas, and even as a law enforcement instructor at a community college, working the road. And one thing that I often saw was I felt like we were missing a little bit on what we could do better at, and that was focusing on preventing violence and really, really bad things that unfortunately we don't want to talk about sometimes that happen in school. And that violence can include the difficult stuff. It can include suicide. It can include bullying, depression, all of the things that we know are really tough in schools. So one day I sat down with my wife and I said, I'm going to run with my idea of really focusing on preventing these bad things from happening. And I created and I founded RIPL. RIPL is spelled RIPL, and it stands for Relational Impactful Preventative Leadership. And what it does is I teach to teachers and students nuggets of information that can help their school be more awesome and ultimately prevent, with all intentions, much of the violence that could happen. I start by teaching the teachers societal factors and behavioral precursors that we always know are common in some of the really bad things that happen. I've studied it to no end, and I've had to become an expert for myself in understanding that we can really teach teachers a way to pick up on things and start what we call early conversations. We know by starting early conversations, we can catch some of this stuff from happening. But I had to take it a step further, and I always identified the one thing that I kept coming back to, and that is positive relationships. So we have to give teachers more nuggets of information again on how they can truly build them positive relationships. Now, many of them are fantastic at them, but some of them are yearning to learn or pick up on a way where they can build a true foundation of positive relationships with the student. So RIPL gives the teachers them tools. We had to take it another step, and we had to find a way where we can teach what the students need to hear and piggyback along the same wonderful information that teachers are always teaching, but deliver it in a powerful impact way. So with the students, we created student assemblies, small group messages, champion groups with some students and some student leaders. We deliver the information in a powerful way that really challenges the hearts and minds through our ripple effect. So that's a great 1 or 2 minute brief introduction to RIPL. And if you wonderful committee members and Mr. Chair, you would allow, I would love to share a 3-minute video showing the student side of it. I chose that side today knowing I didn't have a lot of time, but you'll also see and hear from some teachers what they feel the RIPL message can do for other districts. So Mr. Carl, if he's available, he was gonna play a video kindly.
Super, look forward to it.
Thank you.
So guys, here we are. I hope you guys are ready because we're gonna go into a gymnasium with 900 to 1,000 4th and 5th graders today in an assembly, and it's gonna be amazing. Can't wait for you to see it.
I was just in the RIPL student assembly, and my class just loved it, and it was so fun, and it was what we needed, and so I highly recommend it. It's amazing.
It's great. It hit home for a lot of them. It kind of reminded us why we do what we do.
Everyone was buying into the fact that we're not loners, we're not individuals, we're part of a group, we're part of the pack. We need to look out for each other. We need to reach out, help each other.
Just finished the RIPL training, and I'll tell you what, it's exciting and it works. Get after it.
I'm challenging you to step up, and I'm also challenging you right now to understand how much every single one of you matter. Every single one of you matter. And you matter just as much as the person next to you. And the things that you're gonna do and accomplish in life, you have no idea how you'll be able to impact others, how you'll be able to spread kindness, how you'll be able to achieve whatever it is you dream of. But it starts with remembering that you matter. You matter to me. You matter to the adults in this building, the staff members. And they've just invited me here today to tell you. Maybe you can step up and be a champion for someone else by building a positive relationship, and maybe it just starts with one simple act of kindness. I believe it. Be a champion. Do your very best right now. Step up today. Someone needs you to step up.
RIPL training, it has transformed our school district. Teachers have always been great here, but they have now been given more tools to have stronger relationships with kids that go beyond just the classroom. And I'm seeing kids totally transformed as well. They're realizing that they can be heroes for each other. They can come up to teachers and talk to those teachers. I think before RIPL, teachers were teachers, but now students know that teachers are their champions. Teachers care about them and love them. And it's just made such a difference in our district.
All right, guys, one more school, let's go. So if you want attendance to improve, you want enrollment to increase, you want your overall climate in your school to improve, it's all about relationships. That was a quick video to show you the student assembly side, which is followed up by student meetings and different leadership programs, different kindness challenges that are created and promoted throughout the school district. But it's really a good look at the positive message. If you really want to make schools more and more safe, I believe it fundamentally starts with making sure relationships is the first thing you talk about on day one with kids. It's super critical, it's super important. And it's the foundation for a wonderful culture. Now, I know we do a lot of it, but I think we can always step up and we can always do more. And I'm so honored just to be able to share my positive relationship message today with this group and encourage in anything safety to always include the words positive relationship in terms to school district culture and climate. So with that, I'd be honored to try to answer any questions the best I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Redroot. And you know, it echoes some of the things we've heard over the years. I remember, not in this committee, but over in education, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had Homeland Security come and talk about school safety issues, and they mentioned all the other things that Representative Poston talked about for sure. They talked about hardening, those kind of things. But you know, what they were really emphasizing is very much supporting your approach, your advice here, which is you know, help break the isolation, build relationships with those young human beings that you're with, which I think any good teacher will tell you is a good thing to do, period. But I think someone who's concerned with public safety would also say it's really important to get out in front of issues before they become issues. So I think you've got some really good professional backing for your approach. Let me ask you this really quickly. I know we're not the education committee, but you know, one of the things we do with teachers is that we expect a lot of them. We're always kind of like, do this, you know, let's train you on this, let's train you on that. You know, it is, I know this is important, but I mean, in your work, have you run into teachers that just say, listen, I just can't take another training, or, you know, what's the reception? What's the teacher side response been to this?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. So most recently, RIPL training, I now call the RIPL message. I tell every school up front, it's not a curriculum. It's not another thing. I'm not putting another plate full of stuff in front of your teacher. Instead, allow them to hear my message. It starts out with an all staff message, and it's followed with student assemblies and then small group stuff. So the answer is it's not another something, it's a message. And sometimes the greatest things in life are the things we hear, and certainly the things we hear over and over again. But sooner or later, the way it's delivered has a way of sticking, just to give someone another wonderful mental toolkit to help them do their job even better. I believe in educators. If you follow me online, I think they're some of the greatest people on the planet, and they have an unbelievably difficult job. My team and I at RIPL only want to help make schools to be more awesome. So we really believe it's in giving nuggets of information that they can say, I can use that, or that's helpful in my class, or in the hallway, or the cafeteria, or wherever it is. So a wonderful question. I hope that answers it.
Yeah,
but the reception has been just truly wonderful. Truly wonderful.
Good. All right. Thank you. We do have a couple of committee members with questions and or comments. Representative Rowley and then Representative Wong.
All right, Mr. Chair, I think Representative Wong beat me by about a half a click. If you want to call on him first, in the spirit of
go for it. You got
it,
man.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To the testifier, how many schools have you been to, and how many students do you think you've taught so far?
Oh my goodness. I've probably spoken 30 or 40 districts in Minnesota. And it's tens of thousands of kids that have probably heard the message, and staff maybe. It's a lot. I don't have an exact number, but lots of kids. I've had the wonderful honor to introduce this to many school districts. I created the message in 2018, and then the pandemic didn't help a lot of things, and we did some virtual stuff, but it's a lot of students. Thank you.
It must be tougher in virtual space. Representative Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, you've got an inspiring story. My son, when he was a junior in high school, started an organization called Project Purple. He was working with the Alexandria House for Battered Women and bringing forward ideas on how to take the kids that were in school and show them what was happening with dating violence. And it really started from the grassroots. And that's what I'm hearing in the passion in your voice and what you're doing. This really feels like a grassroots from the bottom up. So 2 follow-up questions, then I'll be done, Mr. Chair. Number 1, how do we get involved? I mean, can I attend one of these? What special permissions do we need? Then I got a follow-up to that, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rutherford.
So thank you so much. I want to answer it in 2 parts. You talked about what your son did. That's inspiring to me, because I started speaking at schools in some partnership programs. I spoke on behalf of in coordination with the Minnesota State Patrol, where I was going into gymnasiums and speaking to kids on good decisions and drunk driving and some wonderful things. And then it just kind of culminated into my idea where I wasn't getting sleep at night thinking about violence in schools. And I believe fundamentally that's through building positive relationships. The number 1 thing that I talk about is I teach to every school that every single student needs to have at least one positive, trusted, caring adult in their life. They need it at the school. We can't assume it's happening anywhere else. And imagine if they know they have one, imagine if they know they have 20. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. It's called the RIPL power, or the power of one. And secondly, I'd love to invite you to any of the messages that I have throughout the state. I'm in a school next week, for example. If you'd be so kind, I can share my contact information somehow with you. Give me a call. I'd invite you to any of the presentations that I have going on. And I'm humbled that you'd be interested in seeing and learning more.
And we can certainly make sure that our committee administrator gets your contact out to all committee members as well. Representative Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll wind up with or I'll end with a statement. It's this type of organization and grassroots effort and positive message that we need so desperately in Minnesota and across our country. This is fantastic. I'm very, very impressed with you, Mr. Or Ben, I don't know how to pronounce it, Rudrud?
Rudrud, yeah.
Rudrud, Mr. Rudrud, I apologize for pronouncing that incorrectly. You know, this is the type of things that we're looking for. It's the beginnings of public safety by making sure that the kids don't get in trouble because they've got a positive role model and we're reinforcing what good behavior looks like. And I'm just so encouraged by this. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Raleigh. You know, I'm trying to remember, there's a name of they've been around for a couple decades now. And you know, I'm going to find them and get it over to you, Mr. Rudrud, and maybe you already know them, but I just can't remember their name. They're a youth development research group. They've probably been around 20, 30 years. And so much of what you're saying is resonating or ringing for me in terms of some of the studied best practices that they've identified, and including that one piece you shared about, you know, that one, you know, important person, that one person present. And often, you know, they would say that be someone in addition to a parent. And obviously as a parent or a grandparent, I use that, you know, I mean, I wanted to be a strong presence in my kid's life, but I also worked to make sure that there were other adults that were present with them as well. It sounds like you're following some really good social science here. I'll get you the contact. All right, we're going to go to Representative Long, and then we're going to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Mr. Rudrud, thank you for your presentation. I've heard quite a lot about you from Representative Postman. I'm so glad to get to see the excellent work you do, and echo the comments of Representative Raleigh that I think this is really important and impactful to, you know, help individual students see that they can connect with one another, support one another, and find trusted adults. In the video, I saw that there were a few students who were moved to tears by the presentation. I don't know if you had insight into, you know, what it was that stuck with them, hit so hard for them, if it was part of the message or if it was self-reflection, or I'd be curious.
Yeah, Mr. Rudrud.
Yeah, so I know the exact part in the presentation when a lot of that happens, and it starts when I talk about my time in school. There was a teacher that totally changed my life, and he was my ripple power. On days when I didn't want to go to school, days when I didn't believe in myself, he did. And then he challenged me. And this message truly started 25 years ago when I was in school. And I didn't know it. I just didn't realize it. And it took so much searching, so much work in the criminal justice field for me to develop it. So it's certainly a part of the presentation where I challenge kids in a way where they understand we're all on the same team. And school is really tough. School is the toughest part of any of our lives. It is. It's one of the toughest part of our lives, going through school. Every one of us could have a story about how difficult it was. And now we have students in a new era of time going through school with social media, for one, which I talk about how difficult that is. But there's a few moments in the presentation where I challenge their hearts. And sometimes I mean, I never want to see tears, but sometimes I do. And they're good tears. And then they follow it up with emails and phone calls to me, or they come up to me afterward and tell me how it's changed their life and how they can step up and be better for their school because they need to. So thank you kindly for your question.
Thank you, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Munir, who's also hanging around from prior, reminded me that the organization I was trying to reference is the Search Institute, actually nationally, internationally known. Boy, so much of what I hear you're doing in your work, in your frame, Mr. Rudrud, just echoes with my limited knowledge of what the Search Institute, you know, has been working on for quite a while now. So good, you know, good objective research evidence. Although I suspect most of us are also reacting just or responding out of just good common sense, you know, in terms of the importance of human dynamics
Yeah.
as core to keeping our communities safe.
Yes. I guess if I could just finish and say thank you kindly to everyone on this call. And I strongly urge you to always consider keeping the words relationships in any messages regarding school safety. It really starts with relationships. So.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Mr.
Chairman.
Redmond. And with that, I will turn to Representative Poston.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you there, Chair.
All right.
Chair Mariani, thank you so much for this time. Ben, thank you for your presentation. You are making a huge difference, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Also to you, Representative Poston, for insisting with me that we spent some good time here diving into this. Appreciate that. Very well. Members, the last item on the agenda should go relatively quickly. This is House File 2433. This is a bill that was heard and included in the omnibus bill last year. I'm the author of it. The committee will not take additional testimony. We heard extensive testimony and debate last year before we moved the bill over to the omnibus, incorporated into our omnibus bill. My motion will be to refer this to the General Register, as we've done with a couple of other bills that were heard last year and moved quickly over. So with that, members, the chair moves House File 2433 be referred to the General Register. This is a public safety entities required to prioritize public safety and human rights. Some of you may recall that last year, in presenting the bill, it focuses on the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, the Post Board, the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Public Safety in terms of directing them for a public safety definition of reducing or preventing crime while maintaining rights. And so that human rights and public safety are not in conflict with one another. And, you know, we, in reference to each of those entities, you know, we repeatedly, you know, evoke what those conditions.
This is Raleigh. We just lost the chair on this end.
There he is.
Okay, hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, Chair.
We can hear you, Chair Mariani.
I've got it. I knew that would happen sooner or later. Not too bad, though. You know, a little over a year run doing that. And you're right, Representative Rowley, that would have absolutely been the appropriate move to do. Before this goes on again, the chair moves the House File 2433 be referred to the General Register. Discussion. Let me pull up my Representative Rowley. I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you help me understand why this is moving to the General Registry as opposed to being laid over for possible inclusion? And I'm just curious how this part works.
Representative Rowley, a bill can certainly be moved forward and also included in an omnibus bill, or simply included in an omnibus bill. It's just the author's desire. I think the bill stands on its own, doesn't necessarily need, it doesn't require an appropriation. So no need to make a stop over what it means. So my hope is to be able to have this clean, if you will, without other issues before the overall body.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Johnson.
Well, Chair Mariani, members, if I remember correctly, last year we had some issues with this bill as well. But I understand it's going back to the general register, still needs a lot of work. Because one thing, public safety is not just in the criminal side of things. Public safety, that part of it is just a fraction of what public safety is. Besides dealing with the criminal aspect of it, public safety also deals with natural disasters, any other dangers that might occur, searching for lost individuals. That's all part of public safety. And this bill just is takes it from encompassing all the things that is involved in public safety down to just a narrow point, which is not what public safety is. The public safety is one of the first things in fact, it is the first thing listed in our state constitution. And that public safety includes keeping people safe from natural disasters and any other type of dangers, not just on the criminal side of things, but any type of dangers. It could be deal with flooding, which is a natural disaster. It could deal with the emergencies on the roads, traffic accidents, a bridge collapse. That's all part of public safety. And this bill just so narrows it, it would take that away from what actually public safety is. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. The bill does very clearly identify the four state agencies, and it does that very intentional, and does not attempt to identify other agencies. So that could very well be an ongoing conversation, perhaps for another bill. Representative Pinto, then we're going to move to a vote here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just can't resist noting that I think for many of us, we're really delighted by the observation that public safety is about more than just criminal justice. And I kind of feel like we've been trying to make that point all the way along. And to my mind, this bill absolutely reflects that. So thank you, Chair, for advancing it.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. I think it's always important for the citizens of a free society to assert their human rights, particularly those encompassed in our state and federal constitution. With that, the chair renews his motion that House File 2433 be referred to the general register, and the clerk will take the roll.
Chair Mariani.
Aye.
Chair Mariani, aye. Vice Chair Frazier.
Aye.
Vice Chair Frazier, aye. Representative Johnson.
No.
Representative Johnson, nay. Representative Edelson. Representative Edelson. Representative Feist.
Aye.
Representative Feist, aye. Representative Grossel.
No.
Representative Grossel, nay. Representative Hullins.
Aye.
Representative Hullins, aye. Representative Hewitt.
Aye.
Representative Hewitt, aye. Representative Klevorn.
Klevorn, aye.
Representative Klevorn, aye. Representative Long.
Aye.
Representative Long, aye. Representative Lucero.
No.
Representative Lucero, nay. Representative Mueller.
Mueller votes no.
Representative Mueller, nay. Representative Novotny. Representative Novotny, nay. Representative O'Neill, excused. Representative Pinto.
Aye.
Representative Pinto, aye. Representative Poston.
Nay.
Representative Poston, nay. Representative Raleigh.
Raleigh, nay.
Representative Raleigh, nay. Representative Vang.
Aye.
Representative Vang, aye. Representative Shung.
Aye.
Representative Shung, aye. Last call for Representative Edelson.
Aye.
Representative Edelson, aye. With 11 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 excused, that concludes roll.
Very well. With 11 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 excused, The motion does prevail. House File 2433 is referred to the General Register. Members, that concludes our business for today. We'll be back at it at our regular time on Thursday. And so until then, have a wonderful day. This committee stands adjourned.